It was precisely 10 minutes past 4 on a drizzly Thursday afternoon when Lord Peter Wimsey, clad in an aggressively mustard-coloured Inverness cape, alighted from his Daimler outside the Georgian portico of Clenston Hall, with the elegance of a man who considered rain an aesthetic affront rather than a meteorological inconvenience. He flicked the ash from his Turkish cigarette onto the gravel and turned to his companion, Chief Inspector Parker of Scotland Yard. "I say, Charles," he drawled, "do you observe the architectural fallacy of this place? Ionic columns pretending to bear weight they manifestly do not. The whole structure is a lie before one even steps over the threshold, quite like its owner from what I've gathered." Parker, accustomed to Wimsey's discursive preambles, merely gave a grunt and glanced towards the heavy oak door, now being opened by a stiff-faced butler, whose expression suggested he'd been informed that a baronet had just died in the library, and someone rather inconvenient was about to solve it. The invitation had been extended via a telegram, delivered with such haste that the corners were still damp. It had read, "Come at once, disturbance, Clenstone Hall, foul play suspected. Sir Reggie dead, billiard room, dreadful mess." It was signed by Lady Honoria Winthrop, née Fanshawe, a woman whose tendency to summon assistance with operatic drama had once led Lord Peter to abandon a perfectly fine lobster bisque in Biarritz, only to find her weeping over a chipped Meissen figurine. Nonetheless, this time it seemed she had struck something real. Sir Reginald Fanshawe, a minor baronet of excellent vintage and rather poor breeding, had been discovered dead that very morning, sprawled inelegantly over the billiard table, with one foot still twitching and a smashed tumbler of brandy beneath him. According to the preliminary report Parker read aloud in the car, the local constable had determined it to be a natural death complicated by clumsiness. But the housemaid had screamed upon noticing an inexplicable detail, a single muddy footprint on the green baize surface of the billiard table, one that, according to every present guest and servant, could not possibly belong to the deceased. Wimsey's eyebrow had ascended like a barometer under pressure. "A footprint on the billiard table, Charles. Well, that is original. Most people have the decency to die on the floor like gentlemen." They were now being led through the cold, echoing corridors of Clenston Hall, where ancestral portraits peered down with the gloomy resignation of those who had seen generations of equally disreputable heirs squander their fortunes on bloodstock and blackmail. The billiard room was situated at the western end of the house, directly beneath the tower room, and adjacent, Wimsey noted with a quick glance at the floor plan mounted in the hall, to the drawing room and study. Lady Honoria met them just outside, the scene of the crime, fluttering like a pale moth in a silk shawl of some distressing colour. "Peter, thank heavens," she gasped. "They'll try to hush it up, you know. The constable's a cousin of the housekeeper and probably in league with the vicar's wife, who has always had it in for Reggie since that incident with the vestry. Funds—" "Yes, yes," Wimsey murmured, patting her absently on the shoulder. "All very improper, but do allow me a look at the table before it is polished into oblivion by some enthusiastic footman." The body had, of course, been removed. The brandy stain remained, and so did the footprint, a perfectly formed impression of a right boot, heel turned ever so slightly inward. Wimsey stared at it for a full 20 seconds without speaking. "Charles," he said finally, in a tone that might have addressed a particularly interesting passage in Tacitus, "what sort of man places his foot upon a billiard table after committing a murder? Or do we suppose Reggie, in his final spasm of gout, decided to perform a jig?" Parker sighed. "The doctor says heart attack, though I suppose if someone did startle him—" "Precisely. But what sort of thing startles a man who eats game pie with his bare hands and once shot a valet for misplacing a bottle of Armagnac?" Wimsey bent forward and peered closer at the print. "It's a size 10 boot, recent mud, not dried. Interesting. Pattern. Look, a split sole, possibly military, yet no other footprints anywhere near it. Very ungallant of it to appear alone." At this point, a sullen young footman was summoned and interrogated about the cleaning schedule, with Wimsey insisting upon such trivialities as whether the billiard table had been brushed clockwise or counterclockwise the night before. Lady Honoria looked faintly hysterical. "Peter, really? Does it matter?" "My dear Honoria," said Wimsey, straightening up, "it may not matter at all, which is precisely why it interests me. When nothing makes sense, it's the sensible Things that become suspicious. He turned to Parker, his face unreadable. Let us interview the house, Charles, every last stick of it. There's a tale in this table, and I suspect the chalk is only just beginning to speak. The first to endure Lord Peter's inquisition was Mrs. Baines, the housekeeper. A woman so angular and forbidding that she might well have been carved out of dried bone and vinegar. She received them in her spotless pantry, where tea things gleamed as though they'd been reprimanded into polish. Wimsey, after scanning the room with what appeared to be mild interest in a doily, seated himself with the relaxed elegance of a man prepared to interrogate someone about murder, while simultaneously remembering the Latin name for marzipan, Mrs. Baines, he began, tapping the ash from a cigarette that was not yet lit. You've been in the service of the Fanshaws for 32 years next Easter, she replied with cold precision. Not that I expect I'll be here then, not with the goings-on in this house. Yes, terrible inconvenience, death, said Wimsey pleasantly. One does wish people would schedule their collapses with greater consideration. Now, if you would cast your memory back to the night before last. The billiard table, when last cleaned? She blinked at him, not used to being questioned about furniture before bodies. Polished it Wednesday morning as usual. Cleaned off the chalk and gave it a rub with the baize brush. I always do it myself. Never trusted young Alfred not to scratch the rails. Admirable prudence, Wimsey murmured. And you saw? No footprint then? No, sir, which would suggest the print appeared sometime between then and the discovery of the body. I suppose so. Parker leaned in. Anyone in the house have muddy boots recently? Sir Reginald came in soaked from the stables late Wednesday, but he changed before dinner, hung the boots in the mudroom. Were they size 10, would you say? Asked Wimsey mildly. Couldn't say, my lord, but his left boot had the sole half coming off. Wimsey's eyes twinkled. Ah, our footprint is from a right boot with a split sole. How perversely asymmetrical. Curious, curious. Next came the butler, Crumley, sepulchral in aspect and infested with gravitas, as though secretly rehearsing for a funeral. He confirmed the evening's events with stiff-lipped clarity. Sir Reginald retired to the billiard room at approximately 10:30. Alone, he did not request company. Her ladyship had retired earlier. Did he appear disturbed? Out. Of breath poisoned or possessed? Wimsey asked with exaggerated seriousness. Crumley did not blink. He appeared to be in excellent spirits. He had won at backgammon. He poured himself 2 fingers of brandy and made an unkind joke about Mr. Algernon's moustache. And who discovered the body? The parlour maid. Elsie. At approximately 7 o'clock this morning, she was bringing in the post. They found Elsie in the scullery, scrubbing a saucepan with more aggression than necessary. A red-faced girl of uncertain age, she burst into tears when Wimsey mentioned the billiard room. It were horrible, sir. He were all stiff, and his eyes open like he saw something behind you, like... And the glass? Yes, the glass. Did you see the footprint at once? No, sir, not till I looked closer. I thought it were a trick of the light, but there it was, just the one. Anyone else been in the room before you screamed? No, sir, I were the first up. I'm always up first to fetch the milk and set the fires. And the billiard room windows? Locked? Yes, sir. Bolted from the inside. Wimsey and... Parker exchanged a glance. The billiard room had but one entrance, one set of windows, and a print upon the table no man admitted to making. The rest of the day was consumed by tedious repetition. The cook, the gardener, the chauffeur, all professing innocence, all reporting nothing out of the ordinary. Sir Reginald had dined on jugged hare and claret, insulted his heir, laughed too loudly and gone to play billiards. Nothing unusual, except the footprint. As they paused for a late luncheon of cold ham and spotted dick, Parker looked worn. You're enjoying this far too much, Peter. My dear fellow, said Wimsey, buttering his bread with an absurd level of concentration. Don't you see? A single footprint on a billiard table in a locked room. It's not a question of who killed him. It's a question of how the footprint got there. He paused and sipped his tea with maddening leisure. I'm not at all sure we're investigating a murder yet, but we are most certainly investigating a footprint, and footprints, Charles, are the devil's own telltales. They rarely lie, unless someone very clever has taught them to. By mid-morning the following day, the household had settled into that brittle hush particular to country houses after a death. formal mourning drapes nowhere in sight, yet voices lowered to whispers and footsteps unnaturally muffled on carpet. Lord Peter Wimsey was in no such mood. He had commandeered the study, turned its desk into an improvised crime board, with bits of string marking points of passage and absurd doodles of boots, and now summoned the heir apparent, Mr. Algernon Fanshawe, for what he termed a civilized and unproductive chat. Algernon arrived in flannel trousers and a look of permanent irritation. He was a long-faced man with the kind of moustache that suggested compensatory effort and a brow that wrinkled as though it had lost something important. He slouched into the armchair opposite Wimsey and immediately asked for whiskey. "Before luncheon?" Wimsey said, raising an eyebrow. "It's afternoon somewhere," Algernon replied, pouring 2 fingers with the air of a man who considered clocks an oppressive invention. Parker, leaning against the window, folded his arms. "Yours, sir." "Reginald's nephew. Only surviving one. My brother Geoffrey died in Italy. Motorbike. Silly business." He paused to drink. "No love lost between Reggie and me. You're welcome to ask anyone." "Oh, I fully intend to," said Wimsey brightly, "though perhaps you'd be kind enough to save us the trouble by summarizing your grievance. It does help if we know what precisely you didn't kill him for." Algernon smirked. "Money, naturally. What else do people squabble about in these tombs? The old man was fond of reminding me I'd never inherit the hall, as long as he had breath enough to pronounce my name wrong. Alderman, he'd call me, or Albatross. Thought it was amusing. And the will, Parker asked, due to be changed, or so he said. Last month he threatened to leave the lot to his stable boy, but that was just Reggie's way. Everything was a provocation. For all I know, he really did write me out of it, but you'll have to ask the solicitor. He's down in Salisbury, a Mr. Jorkins." Wimsey scribbled the name in a notebook, then looked up. "Do you play billiards?" "Occasionally." Reggie was a bore about it. Always insisted on obscure rules and Latin terminology. Lusoria pila, he once called it. "I think he made that up." Wimsey chuckled appreciatively. "A family of eccentricity, then. Were you in the house the night he died?" "Yes." "Retired early. Headache. Didn't fancy another go-round of his evening monologues." "And where? Were you between 10 and 11? In bed? Reading Rabelais?" Parker raised an eyebrow. "Anyone confirm that?" "No one I'd permit in my bedroom, Inspector." They dismissed Algernon with polite thanks and watched him retreat with a gait that managed to be both lazy and theatrical. The moment the door closed, Parker exhaled sharply. "Well, there's your red herring." "Ah," said Wimsey, "but is he red enough? It's all so deliciously obvious. Motive, opportunity, no alibi. Rather like a parlor trick performed, too close to the footlights." He reached for a file on the desk, flipping through the compiled notes. And yet, one footprint, no sign of struggle, no entry or exit, and a brandy glass shattered just so. "I'd wager Reggie never even stood." Before Parker could answer, a knock came at the door and Crumley entered, his expression more sepulchral than usual. "My lord, there is a gentleman in the drawing-room who insists upon seeing you. He will not give his name, only that he is here on matters pertaining to Sir Reginald's death." Wimsey rose with a smile. "Well, let us see what shade from—" "The underworld walks abroad in tweed today." The visitor proved to be one Mr. Lyle, angular, greying, and of that particular breed of middle-aged bachelor who wears brown gloves even indoors. He carried a scent of damp wool and tobacco, and introduced himself as an acquaintance of the late baronet, occasional bridge partner and spiritual adviser. "Spiritual?" Wimsey said, seating himself with a flick of the hand that could have directed an orchestra. "You'll forgive me, Mr. Lyle, but Reggie didn't strike me as the spiritual type. More the carnal pagan with a fondness for cigars." "Ah, but he changed in recent months," Lyle said. "He became, well, let's say more curious about the unknown." Parker narrowed his eyes. "Are we to believe he was involved in seances?" "Not directly, but he had an interest in the esoteric. I recommended a few books, discussed hypothetically the movement of spirits, the echo of psychic footprints." "Footprints?" Wimsey leaned forward. "Did you say psychic footprints?" "Yes." He was fascinated by the idea that places remember trauma, that energies linger. We spoke of it not a week ago. And did he by chance express any fear? Perhaps that someone or something meant him harm? Lyle looked down. He said he'd been dreaming of someone walking on the billiard table. Said he'd wake with the sensation that something had been above him. It frightened him more than he let on. Wimsey glanced at Parker. A premonitory footprint. How charming. Are you suggesting, Parker said dryly, that the murderer was a ghost? Good heavens, no, said Wimsey. But I'm suggesting that someone might like us to think that. He turned back to Lyle. Tell me, did Sir Reginald have enemies? People who might use this psychic residue as theatrical camouflage? Lyle hesitated. He was not universally liked, but he was in his own way admired. A collector of obscure books, I believe. He owned several rare grimoires. Said he kept them in the tower room. The locked one above the billiard room? Yes, always locked. Wimsey stood. Then it is to the tower room we must go. I do adore a locked door. It's such a beautifully unnecessary challenge. The key, predictably, was not in its usual drawer. Lady Honoria declared she hadn't seen it in months, and Crumley was visibly pained at the suggestion he'd ever been allowed to enter such a private space. After an hour of searching and 2 false keys, Wimsey picked the lock with a hairpin and Parker's Swiss Army knife. The tower room was dusty, cold, and lined with cabinets. Books, old, leather-bound and forbidding, lined every wall. A single chair sat beneath a narrow window. On the desk, a half-burned candle and a volume. Titled Ars Mentis Umbrae, The Shadows of the Mind. Wimsey lifted the book with a gloved hand. Printed in Paris, 1683. Banned under 2 kings and an archbishop. Charming bedtime reading. Parker paced to the edge of the room, sniffing. Something's off here. It's too tidy, too staged. Wimsey looked up, eyes gleaming. Exactly. The dust on the floor is disturbed only slightly. A narrow path from the door to the desk. No prints elsewhere. And look there, scratches on the window latch. Recently opened. They moved together to the window. It faced the gardens, directly, above the billiard room extension. A shallow ledge ran along the edge, just wide enough to stand on with care. Wimsey turned, suddenly alert. Charles, I do believe someone paid this room a visit the night Reggie died, and not for light reading. Parker nodded slowly. You think the footprint on the billiard table came from above? I think, said Wimsey with a delighted grin, that someone walked across that ledge, climbed down, or perhaps jumped, and placed that footprint with intention. A message, perhaps, or a theatrical flourish. Parker frowned. But why? Wimsey closed the book and placed it neatly on the desk. That, Charles, is what we must now uncover. Someone in this house has a taste for the dramatic, possibly occult, certainly calculated, and until we know who, the footprint remains less a clue than a curtain, behind which the real trick waits to be seen. By the following morning, the mood in Clenstone Hall had thickened like old pudding, cloying, unspoken, and oddly lumpy with unexpressed suspicions. Wimsey, meanwhile, strolled through it all like a man attending a mildly disappointing country fete. He took his coffee in the conservatory, read the Times obituary page with more interest than decorum, and without explanation asked the maid if she could fetch him a pencil, a compass, and a footstool. When Parker, freshly returned from a frustrating hour trying to reach the elusive solicitor in Salisbury, found him kneeling beside the billiard table with his tongue slightly protruding and a tape measure slung around his neck like an exotic stole, he didn't even bother asking. Planning to redraw the room, are you? No, Charles. I'm attempting to verify an absurd theory involving angles of descent, gravitational arcs, and whether one could plausibly land heel first from a height of 9 feet without breaking one's ankle or pride. Parker, who had learned long ago that interrupting Wimsey's peculiar tangents was like interrupting a cat mid-prowl, merely sat on the edge of a chair and waited. Wimsey continued. Consider the footprint, Charles. Single boot, right foot. Heel inwards. It faces the left pocket of the billiard table, which is curious as Reggie's body was found at the opposite end, and then the height. The mark suggests a firm landing, not a step. Almost as if it were, oh, I don't know, a theatrical landing. Parker frowned. You think someone jumped onto the table? I do, Wimsey said, standing and brushing imaginary dust from his knees. From the window above, a silly risk to be sure, but a rather stylish one, wouldn't you say? Parker rose slowly. You think the killer descended from the Tower room landed on the table, placed the footprint as a diversion, then exited. How, through the main door? Possibly. Or perhaps not at all. The table may not have been the exit point. It may have been the message. A performance. A symbol. Think, Charles. Who would go to such effort to stage a murder in a locked room and leave behind a single enigmatic clue? Parker pinched the bridge of his nose. Someone theatrical. Precisely. Enter Lady Honoria. She flounced into the billiard room with the injured air of a woman who has not been properly thanked for hosting a corpse. Peter, do tell me how much longer you plan to disrupt the domestic routine. The gardener refuses to trim the hedges while you're investigating, and I've had to postpone my bridge luncheon. I'll send a formal apology to your lawn, Honoria, Wimsey said gravely. But while you're here, perhaps you might satisfy a small curiosity. Who in your social circle or family has a flair for dramatics? I don't mean the amateur. Theatricals at the vicarage, I mean someone obsessed with appearances. A performer at heart. Lady Honoria blinked. Well, if you mean dramatic in the sense of storming out of rooms and quoting Browning in the garden, then I suppose you'd mean Veronica. Veronica, Parker repeated. My cousin, she said, rolling her eyes. Half French or half mad. Or possibly both. She arrived last month for a creative sabbatical and has been living in the East Wing, writing something unpublishable about Gothic women and velvet despair. She and Reggie did not get along. He caught her burning herbs on the windowsill and called her a charlatan in chiffon. Delightful, Wimsey murmured. Would she have had access to the tower room? She claimed the energies up there were stagnant, refused to go near it. Even more delightful. Veronica Fanshawe proved to be exactly as advertised. Willowy, overdressed and surrounded by books with titles like Echoes from the Cryptic Moon and Alchemy for the Disillusioned Heart. She received Wimsey and Parker in a room that smelled faintly of rosemary and self-indulgence. Yes, she said languidly, I read tarot. I chart dreams. But I don't murder people if that's what this is about. Of course not, Wimsey said, smiling. But you are a theatrical soul, Miss Fanshawe. You understand symbols, footprints, for instance. Her eyes sharpened. You think the footprint is symbolic. I think someone wants it to appear that way. Perhaps even someone who understands the significance of steps, patterns, directionality. Someone who knows how to leave a clue too obvious to question and too specific to ignore. She cocked her head. You think Reggie was murdered. I think Reggie was given a fright, perhaps fatally so, and someone wanted that fright to look unnatural. She crossed her arms. You suspect me? I suspect someone with a taste for storytelling. Who better than a writer? Veronica's laugh was sudden and bitter. Reggie thought stories were dangerous. Said they made people weak. He hated me. Threatened to have me removed. Said I made the house smell of mildew and incense. And did you? Not the mildew, Wimsey leaned back. Miss Fanshawe, were you in your room the night Reggie died? I was writing, with headphones on. Ah, music. Marler, Parker, scribbled a note. Wimsey smiled faintly. Thank you. That'll be all for now. As they stepped into the corridor, Parker whispered, She's mad. Possibly. But not stupid, Wimsey said. And certainly not careless. That incense, reek may well mask something more specific. They continued their rounds, and as Wimsey grew increasingly cheerful, Parker grew increasingly grim. You're enjoying this, he said. Charles, Wimsey said, pausing to light a cigarette. You mistake me. I find murder abhorrent. But I do enjoy lies, especially the ones too beautifully crafted to be true. He exhaled a long stream of smoke and pointed toward the parlor. Now come along. We've interrogated the house. Let's interrogate the objects. Parker blinked. Objects? Precisely. This house is talking. We've just been rude enough not to listen. The parlor, like much of Clenstone Hall, had the air of something arranged to impress once, but subsequently left to moulder. Harpsichord sat silently beneath a yellowing oil painting of a lady with unfortunate cheekbones, while a grandfather clock ticked away with passive menace in the corner. Lord Peter Wimsey entered as though the room had asked for him personally, paced to the fireplace, then spun abruptly on his heel to face Parker. Let's talk clocks, Parker sighed. I knew you'd get there eventually. Wimsey moved to the mantel where a small ormolu clock stood discreetly nestled between two alabaster busts of tragic youths. This clock here, note the dust ring, Charles. It's been moved recently. Why? To wind it? Possibly, but I asked Crumley earlier. He said this room hadn't been entered since Reggie's death, save for Lady Honoria taking tea yesterday. Parker approached. Moved after the murder, then? Indeed. And yet, look here. Wimsey lifted the clock, turning it carefully. It is 5 minutes slow, precisely 5 minutes. That's not neglect. It's deliberate. He replaced it, then turned to the windows. The light from this room spills into the corridor, and the grandfather clock over there chimes every quarter. I timed it myself just now. Dead on. Parker raised a brow. And the point of this horological tour? Wimsey's expression grew more focused. We're testing the chronology. Not the who, not yet, but the when. Reggie's time of death was fixed by the constable at between 10:15 and 10:30 p.m. He was last seen alive at 10, pouring himself a drink. The brandy glass shattered at his right hand. The fire had gone out by the time Elsie found him, but the embers were warm. He moved again with cat-like ease to the hallway. Now consider. The billiard room fireplace was lit, but the ash suggests it burned down between 10:30 and midnight. Reggie was not one to let a fire die if he meant to stay up, so either he died quickly and the fire was left, or someone stayed watching it burn. Parker frowned. Or arrived later. Quite. But here's the twist. Crumley says he heard the grandfather clock strike 11 while descending from the east wing after ensuring the silver was locked. He claims he saw no light in the billiard room. But Elsie insists the door was shut. That means someone doused the lights or never turned them on. Parker considered this. Could be nothing, but it rarely is. Now, come with me. Wimsey led Parker outside, across the gravel, path to the eastern gardens, where the billiard room extension jutted out from the house like an architectural afterthought. From this angle, one could see the shallow slate ledge of the tower window above, and the flat stone lintel just above the billiard room windows. Wimsey gestured upward. A man could climb from the tower, slide to the lintel, and drop directly to the billiard table through the window if it were open. We found scratches on the latch, remember, and a scuff on the outside sill. But the windows were found bolted from inside, Parker pointed out. Indeed, but what if they were? Closed after the fact. It would require someone with time, agility, and access to the room without being seen. Someone who could enter and exit as they pleased. A servant. Unlikely, too much risk. No, someone else, someone with a key, Parker sighed. Or a duplicate. Now you're getting warmer. They re-entered the house and headed to the study, where Wimsey had arranged his collection of evidence like a mildly deranged museum curator. A small box labelled silver. Mudroom contained a pair of boots caked in dried earth. Wimsey picked one up. Size 10. Right boot with a split sole. These are Reggie's. But the mud, note the mineral flecks? Parker bent to look. Ironstone. Exactly. That clay only turns up at the edge of the old orchard. Reggie hadn't walked there in weeks, according to the gardener. So how is it that his boots are muddy from a location he hadn't visited, while the footprint, bearing the same sole pattern, shows no sign of that ironstone mix? Parker's eyes narrowed. They're not the same boot. Wimsey nodded. Someone planted the boot print, used a boot of the same make, copied the exact tread, placed it with precision. That's elaborate. Too elaborate to be casual. This was not just a murder, it was a performance. They paused as Crumley entered with his habitual gloom. Pardon me, my lord. There is a visitor, Mr. Jorkins, the solicitor. He arrived quite flustered, demanding to speak with you both. Show him in, Wimsey said at once. Mr. Jorkins entered like a man carrying bad news in his pocket and terrified it might leak. Thin, mustachioed and drenched from the rain, he held a cracked briefcase with the anxious grip of a man who knew that secrets were valuable only when contained. I came as soon as I heard, he said breathlessly. This whole affair, most distressing. I was in Bath and didn't receive the telegram until this morning. Quite all right, Wimsey said soothingly. Just one question to begin. Had Sir Reginald recently altered his will? Jorkins swallowed. Yes, The new version was due to be signed next week. He intended to disinherit Mr. Algernon entirely and leave the estate in trust to Miss Fanshawe. Parker blinked. Veronica? Jorkins nodded. He said she needed stability. He thought Algernon too volatile. Wimsey steepled his fingers. So Veronica stood to gain everything if Reggie died before signing a will revoking her benefit. Precisely. And only she and Reggie knew the contents? I believe so. Wimsey nodded slowly. That, Charles, is a motive. Parker stood. And a rather pressing one. Jorkins added hesitantly, one more thing. I was told Reggie had begun keeping certain items, a journal, private correspondence, in a safe behind the bookcase in the tower room. I advised him against it, but he was paranoid of late. Wimsey was already moving. Come, Charles, to the tower. Let's see what the dead chose to hide. They climbed the stairs again, and after a few moments' search, Wimsey located the faint edge of a panel behind a row of dusty books on mesmerism and Albanian folklore. With Parker's assistance, he prized it open. Inside sat a steel box, locked, but unguarded. Wimsey cracked it with a small screwdriver and a murmured Latin phrase. The contents were modest: a stack of letters, a half-used diary, and a set of photographs, several of Veronica, younger and smiling. One of Algernon, arm in arm with a woman Parker did not recognize. But it was the diary that drew Wimsey's eye. Listen to this, he murmured. Tuesday. Veronica swears the house is haunted, claims to hear whispers in the tower. I told her ghosts don't pay rent. She wept. He flipped further. Thursday, found footprint on billiard table last week, brushed it off. Thought nothing of it. Now it's back. No one claims it. I am being watched. Wimsey looked up, face sharpening. He saw the footprint before and he didn't die then. That means whoever left it returned. And this time they finished the act. Parker leaned over the diary. This whole thing, it's a game. The footprint, the books, the ledge, a puzzle box. Exactly, Wimsey said. And like all puzzle boxes, there's one mechanism that, when triggered, opens the whole thing. He tapped the page. And I think Reggie left it for us. The diary sat on the desk like a thing that had waited too long to speak. Wimsey turned its pages with a mixture of reverence and surgical scrutiny, each entry peeling back a new layer of Sir Reginald's tightly buttoned life. The early notes were typical of a cantankerous baronet, complaints about gout, poor claret, and the idiocy of modern politics. But as the weeks progressed, the tone shifted. Reggie became less bombastic, more anxious, suspicious, even afraid. Listen to this, Wimsey said, tapping the next page. She said she saw me in the corridor at midnight, but I was in bed, I heard nothing. Am I sleepwalking? Or is someone pretending to be me? Parker peered over his shoulder. What is this, Peter? He thinks someone's impersonating him? Wimsey's smile curled. Or he's laying the groundwork for that theory. A man like Reggie didn't lose his faculties easily. He may have suspected something precise, something he couldn't quite prove. Let's see. Found a pack of cards in the tower I did not leave. Smelt sandalwood in the library. I do not believe in ghosts, but someone in this house wants me to. Parker straightened. Veronica? Possibly. She certainly fits. The theatrical bill. But this goes deeper. There's calculation here, the impersonation, the sense, the staged footprint. It's all crafted to unnerve, to disorient. Reggie was being driven towards some kind of breakdown. He flipped again. Spoke to Jorkins, told him to prepare new will. Will sign next week. Must rid the hall of these hyenas. They do not wait for one to die. They circle. Wimsey looked up, face thoughtful. He knew someone wanted him dead, but what he didn't know or wouldn't say was who. So he played along. Parker tapped the edge of the desk. That still leaves us with the logistics. If someone impersonated him or entered the tower room to unsettle him, they'd need a key, knowledge of the layout, and confidence. And motive, Wimsey added. Always motive. They returned downstairs, taking the diary with them, and requested once again to speak with Crumley. The butler arrived promptly, expression carved from the usual cold marble. Crumley, Wimsey, said, Has anyone besides Sir Reginald ever had access to the tower room? The butler hesitated. To my knowledge, only Sir Reginald held the key. He was particular about that room. And if someone had made a duplicate? Crumley's eyes flicked to the side for just a second. Barely perceptible, but there. Cannot speak to that, my lord. I do not inspect my employer's keys. Wimsey nodded slowly. Of course, you are discreet, admirably so, but tell me, on the night Sir Reginald died, you heard the grandfather clock strike 11 while descending. From the east wing? Yes, my lord. And you saw no light in the billiard room? None. Curious, then, that Elsie later found the fire still warm and the glass shattered nearby. The scene suggests he had only recently died, but your testimony places the room in darkness at that hour. Crumley said nothing. Wimsey smiled thinly. Thank you, Crumley. That will be all. As the door closed behind him, Parker muttered, He's hiding something. Certainly, but not necessarily guilt. He may simply know more than he thinks wise to say. Loyalty is the butler's poison. They were interrupted by Lady Honoria's voice calling from the hallway. Peter, I've remembered something. She appeared in the doorway, flushed with the exertion of remembering and dressed in a shawl of such lurid pattern that Parker reflexively winced. It's about that ghastly diary, she said, settling into a chair. I recall Reggie shouting at someone about it last week, saying they had no right to touch his things. I assumed it was Veronica, naturally, but now I wonder, could it have been Algernon? Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Why would he go near the tower? I've no idea, but he stormed out of the drawing room just after the argument. Reggie followed him and slammed the door. There was quite a scene. I didn't mention it before because, well, one's relatives do quarrel, don't they? Some more lethally than others, Wimsey murmured. Lady Honoria leaned forward. Do you think it's Veronica? I know she's eccentric, but I can't imagine her staging footprints and climbing down ledges. Oh, I can, Wimsey said dryly, but I don't yet know if she did. They excused themselves and returned once again to the study. Wimsey removed the photographs from the steel box and examined them more closely. One, in particular, caught his attention. Look at this, Charles. Algernon with a woman, not Veronica, not Honoria, someone else. Parker leaned in. That's definitely not anyone we've met. Wait, hang on. Doesn't she look familiar? Wimsey didn't answer. He flipped the photo and read the inscription on the back. To R. With gratitude for your silence. M. He tapped the desk. We need to speak to Algernon again. They found him in the library, hunched over a detective novel he seemed to be ignoring entirely. Algernon, Wimsey said, holding up the photo. Tell me about this woman. He stiffened. That's no one. A friend. A friend who wrote, a thank you note to your uncle for keeping quiet? Algernon's mouth twitched. That was years ago. Reggie was blackmailing me. Not for money, he didn't need it, for sport. Parker narrowed his eyes. What was he holding over you? Algernon hesitated. The woman in the picture, Margaret. She was married. Her husband worked in the Treasury. Reggie found out and threatened to expose me. Why now? Wimsey asked. Why bring this up in a will revision? Because I ended it. Reggie couldn't stand being defied. He said he'd ruin me, leave everything to Veronica out of spite. Wimsey studied. Him. And did you kill him? No, Algernon snapped, but I wished him dead. Isn't that enough for your notebook? He stormed off. Parker turned to Wimsey. This is getting murkier. Yes, Wimsey said, and we haven't even opened the curtains yet. That evening, as the rain battered the mullioned windows and the wind howled like a thespian with laryngitis, Wimsey returned alone to the tower room. He carried only the diary and a single candle. He sat at the desk, opened the book to the final entry and read, I know now who it is, but I dare not accuse. They are clever, cleverer than I gave credit. If this is found, remember, the footprint. Here's not the clue. The absence is. What's not there matters more than what is. Wimsey exhaled. What's not there? He looked up at the shelves. One row was dustier than the rest. One book sat flush with the edge, the only one that looked recently touched. He pulled it free. Behind it a panel, and behind that a narrow passage, a servant's stair, long disused, dusty, but intact. It led directly down, straight into the wall behind the billiard room fireplace. Wimsey smiled. Now that, he murmured, is a path no one mentioned. Lord Peter Wimsey's discovery of the hidden passage behind the tower room bookshelf was a revelation that promised to crack the house's tightly held secrets. The stairway, narrow and steep, spiraled downward in near darkness, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of damp stone. Lighting a candle, Wimsey descended with the care of a man tiptoeing through a library after curfew, while Parker waited above, his fingers nervously tapping the desk. The stairway emptied into a cramped, cobwebbed chamber behind the billiard room fireplace, a forgotten service corridor once used by footmen and servants to move discreetly through the house without disturbing the gentry. The walls were grimy, the floor uneven, but unmistakably functional. Wimsey's eyes glittered as he inspected the brickwork and the soot-stained hearth visible through the thin wooden panel. "This," he murmured, "is the perfect stage for misdirection." Parker followed, flashlight cutting through the gloom. "How does this change things? Imagine, Charles, if our elusive visitor entered the tower room, climbed the ledge, and then slipped down this passage. From here he could appear on the billiard table without ever using the main door or window." Parker nodded slowly. "That explains the locked windows and absence of footprints in the hallway, but it doesn't explain the footprint on the table itself, unless it was left deliberately." But that footprint is the linchpin. The question is why it was left and by whom." They ascended back to the study, where Lady Honoria was waiting anxiously, biting her lip. Wimsey laid out his findings and motioned for Parker to summon the household once again. As the guests and servants gathered, Wimsey's expression became almost theatrical. He addressed the room with calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, this house has long been accustomed to secrets, but yesterday we found one concealed quite literally behind a bookshelf, a passage that allows a certain mobility impossible to our initial understanding." He paused, scanning the crowd. "That someone chose to leave a single muddy footprint on the billiard table was no accident. It was a message, a misdirection designed to confound us." Lady Honoria gasped faintly. Veronica's eyes narrowed, and Algernon's jaw tightened. Wimsey continued, "Now I would like to revisit certain testimonies, specifically those of our butler, Mr. Crumley, and the parlour-maid, Elsie." He turned to Crumley. "You testified that you heard the grandfather clock strike 11 while descending the east wing, yet you did not see any light in the billiard room." Crumley nodded stiffly. "That is correct, my lord. Yet Elsie found the fire embers warm and a brandy glass shattered near Sir Reginald's body. How do you reconcile this?" Crumley's eyes flickered, betraying discomfort. I can only say I did not enter the billiard room." Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "Yet you have keys to every part of this house, do you not?" "Only those I am permitted to use, my lord." "And was this night different?" The butler faltered. I cannot say." Wimsey nodded, turning to Elsie. "And you, young woman, did you notice anything unusual on the morning of the discovery?" Elsie swallowed nervously. I heard noises around midnight, like footsteps but slow, heavy." "Where did you hear them?" "Down the corridor near the billiard room." "Did you see who it was?" "No, sir, I was too frightened." Wimsey smiled gently. "No cause for fear. In time all will be revealed." He moved to the mantel and picked up a length of broken chalk. This chalk, used for marking billiard balls, was found scattered on the floor. He drew a line on the table's surface with the chalk. "Imagine someone pacing, waiting, nervous, then placing one boot on the table. This is not the footprint of a confident assassin. It is the—" Mark of hesitation. He turned to Algernon, voice low but firm. "Mr. Fanshawe, you claim you were reading in your room at the time of death. Yet you left the drawing room in a rage after arguing with Sir Reginald. No one can vouch for your whereabouts between 10 and 11. Care to explain?" Algernon's face reddened. "I needed fresh air." "Indeed. And yet, no one saw you." He then faced Veronica. "Miss Fanshawe, you professed to be writing with headphones on. Yet you were spotted in the east wing corridor near midnight by the maid. Care to clarify?" Veronica's lips curled. "I was retrieving a manuscript. I was careful not to disturb anyone." Wimsey smiled thinly. One must always be careful when one's movements might be misunderstood, but your presence near the passageway at midnight is most intriguing. He turned to the whole assembly. There is a pattern of secrecy, deception, and concealment at Clenstone Hall, but the truth will out, not through force but through careful attention to detail. Suddenly a loud crash echoed from the billiard room. All turned sharply, including Wimsey, whose eyes twinkled with a mixture of amusement and calculation. They rushed to the scene to find the heavy cue rack overturned, the cues scattered across, the floor and the single muddy footprint, previously pristine, smeared and partially erased. Wimsey crouched, examining the disturbed print. "Someone is growing impatient," he muttered. Parker nodded grimly. "Or desperate." Wimsey rose, addressing the room. "This house is a stage, and we have an actor among us who would prefer the curtains close. Prematurely." He locked eyes with each present, his gaze lingering longest on Algernon and Veronica. Then, with a faint smile, he added, "But as the playwright, I assure you, the final act is yet to come." Lord Peter Wimsey's eyes gleamed as he returned to the billiard room for the midnight stakeout he had announced with characteristic flourish. The room was dimly lit by a solitary shaded lamp on the sideboard, its glow casting long shadows that danced menacingly on the polished floor and the green baize of the table. Outside, a biting wind rattled the ancient window panes, as if the very house itself was eager to shed its secrets. Wimsey settled into the deep leather armchair by the window, the candlelight playing off the gold embroidery on his Inverness cape. Parker took his post discreetly near the door, while Lady Honoria, against all propriety, insisted on staying nearby, clutching a cup of tea with trembling hands. "I suppose this is the point," Wimsey murmured, "when one waits for the curtain to rise on the final act." Parker yawned, stifling it behind his hand. "If our suspect does not mind, I might prefer a less dramatic conclusion." Wimsey smiled thinly. "Patience, Charles. Theatre is not merely spectacle. It is the revelation of truth through performance." As the clock chimed 12, a silence descended so thick it seemed to swallow sound itself. The only noise was the steady drip of rain from the eaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Then, as if summoned by the suspense itself, a faint creak echoed. From above, the tower room. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. "They're coming." Parker rose quietly and approached the narrow spiral staircase leading to the tower. Wimsey followed, candle in hand, moving with a feline grace. The stairs led them to the tower room, where the dusty volumes sat in heavy silence. Wimsey's gaze caught the edge of the panel concealing the hidden stairway. He motioned to Parker, who opened it with practiced ease. They descended cautiously into the concealed passage, the air thick with the scent of old stone and forgotten whispers. At the foot of the stairs, the passage opened into the billiard room's chimney recess. Wimsey pointed at a small pile of mud on the hearth's edge, distinct from the dust and ashes, evidence of recent presence. Suddenly, a figure moved in the shadows. "Hold!" Wimsey's voice was calm but commanding. From the darkness emerged Veronica Fanshawe, her cheeks flushed and eyes alight with desperate resolve. In one hand she clutched a small vial, in the other a letter addressed to Sir Reginald. "I should have known," Wimsey said softly. "Your performance has been impeccable, Miss Fanshawe, but every actor slips." Veronica's breath came, fast. "You don't understand. I had no choice." "Come now," Wimsey said, stepping closer. "Why go to such lengths? The hidden stare, the footprint, the staged haunting." She looked away, voice breaking. "Because I loved him once. And he was destroying himself. The threats, the paranoia. I thought if I could scare him, maybe he'd see sense." "Scare him to death?" She nodded miserably. "I never meant to kill him. Only to frighten." Wimsey sighed. "You planted the footprint?" "Yes, I borrowed one of his boots, muddied it in the orchard and placed it there to startle him." "And the secret passage?" "I found it in his journals. He'd hidden it to move unseen. I used it to come and go without being seen." "Why the vial?" She hesitated. "Poison. I wanted to give him something to scare him further, something subtle, but I never gave it to him. It was in my pocket when you caught me." Wimsey nodded. "And the shattered glass?" "An accident. I dropped it when he surprised me." The tension broke as Parker moved to secure her. Lady Honoria looked Stunned. "Veronica, why keep this from us?" I was afraid, Veronica whispered, of losing everything, of losing him. Wimsey turned to the assembled household, voice raised. "Ladies and gentlemen, this tragedy was born of love, fear, and desperation. A theatrical misdirection gone horribly wrong." He glanced at Parker. "I believe Sir Reginald died not of poison or murder, but of a heart attack brought on by fear and stress." Parker nodded. "The doctor's report did mention heart failure." Wimsey smiled wryly. "Sometimes the greatest mysteries are the simplest truths, cloaked in shadows of our own making." He addressed Veronica gently. "You will face the law, but I trust mercy will temper justice in this case." Veronica collapsed into tears. The household exhaled collectively. Wimsey turned to Lady Honoria. "And now, my dear, shall we have that bridge luncheon? I'm quite famished after an evening of intrigue." She smiled wanly. "Only if you promise no more surprises." He bowed. "No promises, I'm afraid. Life, like theatre, thrives on the unexpected." The morning after the midnight revelation dawned heavy with mist and muted light, as though the very skies themselves sought to temper the grim truths unearthed beneath their watchful gaze. Lord Peter Wimsey stood once more, in the billiard room, now cleared of its recent turmoil but still resonant with the echoes of confession and despair. The furniture was rearranged, the green baize wiped clean, yet the memory of the muddy footprint, the symbol of a fractured trust and a desperate act, lingered like an indelible stain upon the house's conscience. Wimsey's fingers traced an absent line across the table's surface, his mind weaving the final strands of a tapestry long in the making. Parker stood beside him, eyes sharp, ready to bear witness to the closing act of a drama that had unfolded with all the subtlety of a Greek tragedy. "Charles," Wimsey began, voice low and deliberate, "our tale is not merely one of love and fear, though those are the actors in the foreground. Beneath lies a lattice of deception, a careful orchestration designed to mislead even the most discerning eye." He gestured toward the study, where a collection of documents lay spread like petals of a dark flower. "Let us consider the timeline more closely." He picked up the diary once more, flipping to the entry before Sir Reginald's final note. Monday. Night. Heard footsteps in the corridor, shadows moving where none should be. The ticking of clocks seems irregular, as though time itself is bent. I am being watched. Wimsey's eyes gleamed with the precision of a man who delights in unveiling the truth. Time, Charles, is the greatest trickster of all, and Reggie's tormentor understood this well. He turned to Parker. "You recall Crumley's statement that the grandfather clock struck 11 while he descended the east wing?" "Yes, but the clock on the mantel was 5 minutes slow." "Indeed. So the true time of the striking was closer to 11:05 p.m. Not that it matters much, except that it places events out of sync with the household's account." Parker nodded slowly. "The staggered clocks, a deliberate confusion." "Exactly. Our murderer manipulated time to obscure their movements, creating alibis and sowing doubt." Wimsey paused, his fingers tapping rhythmically. "Now consider Algernon's late-night absence and the argument with Sir Reginald. He had motive, opportunity, and temper." "But he claimed innocence," Parker said. "True. Yet the woman in his photograph, Margaret, suggests a secret that Reggie held over him. Blackmail, no less." "And Veronica?" Parker asked. "Her theatrics and obsession with the occult were a mask, a smokescreen for a far more calculating mind." Wimsey smiled faintly. "But the final piece is the footprint itself." He retrieved the cast of the footprint made by the forensic team, a perfect impression of a size 10 right boot, heel turned inward. "Notice the wear patterns," Wimsey said, holding it to the light. "This sole is worn more heavily on the outer edge, suggesting a limp, yet Reggie's boots showed no such limp." Parker frowned. "So the footprint doesn't belong to Sir Reginald?" "No, it belongs to our killer." He held up a pair of boots found in the mudroom, the very boots with a split sole. "Look closely. These boots have been altered. The right boot is from Algernon, the left from another pair entirely." Parker's eyes widened. "Algernon has been careful, but not careful enough." Wimsey turned to the assembled household, who had been quietly gathered in the drawing room, tension thick as London fog. My friends, the evidence points clearly to one person. Algernon stood, face pale but defiant. You have accused me, he said, voice shaking. On what grounds? Wimsey's gaze was steady, unwavering. On motive, your inheritance was threatened. On opportunity, you had access to the hidden passages. On deception, you staged the footprint and manipulated the household's clocks. And on desperation, you argued bitterly with Sir Reginald hours before his death. Algernon's face twisted. I did not kill him. No, Wimsey said softly. You did not strike the fatal blow. But your actions precipitated his death. The stress, the confrontation, the fear. You were the catalyst. He paused, eyes flicking to Veronica, who sat trembling. Miss Fanshawe attempted to frighten Sir Reginald, yes, but it was Algernon who pushed him toward ruin. Algernon's resolve broke. He sank into a chair, defeated. I never meant for it to end like this, Wimsey nodded. Intent matters less than consequence. He turned to Parker. Bring them both to the constable. We have a full confession. Waiting in the wings. The room seemed to exhale collectively. Wimsey addressed Lady Honoria. And you, my dear, should consider locking your books and keeping a closer eye on family affairs. She managed a weak smile. As Algernon and Veronica were led away, Wimsey glanced at Parker. Another case closed, Charles. Parker shook his head. Yet no one wins. True, Wimsey said, but sometimes justice is not a triumph, but a quiet reckoning. The two men left Clenstone Hall together, the morning mist rising to veil the secrets now laid bare beneath the sombre English sky. The final chapter of the Clenstone Hall tragedy had closed with all the sombre gravity of a Victorian funeral procession. Yet amid the mourning and quiet reflections, Lord Peter Wimsey retained that irrepressible glint of wry amusement that had first accompanied him through the storm of secrets. It was a damp morning, with the mist hanging low and the gardens sodden, but the detective's spirits were not so easily dampened. He stood on the terrace, pipe in hand, surveying the house whose walls now bore the weight of revelations and regrets. Parker joined him, wiping the last traces of rain from his collar, and with the patience of a man well accustomed to his companion's theatrical tendencies, waited for the inevitable summation. Peter, Parker began, I suppose this is the part where you enlighten me with your reflections on human nature, or at least offer some closing bon mot before the rest of us return to normality. Wimsey smiled, the corners of his mouth curling like the delicate scrolls of a Baroque cherub. Ah, Charles, there is always something to be said about the curious ways of the human heart. At Clenstone Hall, we observed how love can twist into fear, how desperation can masquerade as devotion, and how the greatest deception lies not in the crime itself, but in the lies we tell ourselves to endure it. He took a long draw on his pipe, exhaling a ring of smoke that drifted lazily toward the grey sky. Sir Reginald was a man of contradictions, a baronet with a brittle spirit, a tyrant who nevertheless inspired loyalty, a victim of his own machinations. And Veronica and Algernon, both ensnared by their passions and frailties, dancing a dangerous waltz across the stage of family drama. Parker nodded thoughtfully. And the footprint? Ah, the footprint. The perfect red herring. A mark meant to mislead, a symbol of confusion amidst the chaos. It was the key to unlocking the mystery, not because it told the truth, but because it invited us to question everything else. Wimsey's eyes twinkled as he turned to leave the terrace. As for justice, Charles, it is often less a blaze of glory and more a quiet reconciliation with consequences. In the end, mercy must temper the law's severity, especially when the sins are born of love and fear rather than malice. Parker smiled wryly. You make it sound almost poetic. Life, dear fellow, is the greatest poem of all, full of unexpected rhymes and discordant notes. As they descended the stone steps toward the waiting motor car, Lady Honoria appeared at the doorway, her expression softened by the morning. Light. Peter, she said, thank you for seeing through the darkness and bringing some peace to this house. Wimsey bowed, tipping his hat with a flourish. It was my pleasure, Lady Honoria. Though I must confess, your family provides material that would keep any playwright in work for years. She laughed, the sound lightening the heavy air. As you leave, may I offer a small piece of advice? By all means. Next time, perhaps fewer occult references and fewer muddy boots. It saves everyone a great deal of trouble, Wimsey chuckled. Noted, though I rather suspect that without such embellishments life would be dreadfully dull. With a final wave, he stepped into the car, and as the wheels crunched over the gravel and the estate faded behind them, he turned to Parker with a smile. Another case closed. Another footprint vanished in the sands of time. Parker shook his head with a smile. I do wonder, Peter, how you manage to find amusement in the macabre. Wimsey tapped his pipe against his lips thoughtfully. Because, Charles, in the end, the greatest mystery of all is the human heart, its folly, its courage, and its indomitable capacity for both darkness and light. And that, my friend, is a story worth telling. As the car sped away, the rain began to ease and the first shy rays of sun pierced the cloud cover, casting a tentative glow upon the ancient stones of Clenstone Hall, where the footprints had been left, the secrets unveiled, and the truth, as always, had found its way into the light. The final chapter of the Clenstone Hall tragedy had closed with all the sombre gravity of a Victorian funeral procession, yet amid the mourning and quiet reflections, Lord Peter Wimsey retained that irrepressible glint of wry amusement that had first accompanied him through the storm of secrets. It was a damp morning, with the mist hanging low and the gardens sodden, but the detective's spirits were not so easily dampened. He stood on the terrace, pipe in hand, surveying the house whose walls now bore the weight of revelations and regrets. Parker joined him, wiping the last traces of rain from his collar, and with the patience of a man well accustomed to his companion's theatrical tendencies, waited for the inevitable summation. Peter, Parker began, I suppose this is the part where you enlighten me with your reflections on human nature, or at least offer some closing bon mot before the rest of us return to normality. Wimsey smiled, the corners of his mouth curling like the delicate scrolls of a Baroque cherub. Ah, Charles, there is always something to be said about the curious ways of the human heart. At Clenstone Hall we observed how love can twist into fear, how desperation can masquerade as devotion, and how the greatest deception lies not in the crime itself, but in the lies we tell ourselves to endure it. He took a long draw on his pipe, exhaling a ring of smoke that drifted lazily toward the grey sky. Sir Reginald was a man of contradictions, a baronet with a brittle spirit, a tyrant who nevertheless inspired loyalty, a victim of his own machinations. And Veronica and Algernon, both ensnared by their passions and frailties, dancing a dangerous waltz across the stage of family drama. Parker nodded thoughtfully. And the footprint? Ah, the footprint, the perfect red herring. A mark meant to mislead, a symbol of confusion amidst the chaos. It was the key to unlocking the mystery, not because it told the truth, but because it invited us to question everything else. Wimsey's eyes twinkled as he turned to leave the terrace. As for justice, Charles, it is often less a blaze of glory and more a quiet reconciliation with consequences. In the end, mercy must temper the law's severity, especially when the sins are born of love and fear rather than malice. Parker smiled wryly. You make it sound almost poetic. Life, dear fellow, is the greatest poem of all, full of unexpected rhymes and discordant notes. As they descended the stone steps toward the waiting motor car, Lady Honoria appeared at the doorway, her expression softened by the morning light. Peter, she said, thank you for seeing through the darkness and bringing some peace to this house. Wimsey bowed, tipping his hat with a flourish. It was my pleasure, Lady Honoria, though I must confess your family provides material that would keep any playwright in work for years. She laughed, the sound lightening the heavy air. As you leave, may I offer a small piece of advice? By all means. Next time, perhaps fewer occult references and fewer muddy boots. It saves everyone a great deal of trouble, Wimsey chuckled. Noted, though I rather suspect that without such embellishments life would be dreadfully dull. With a final wave, he stepped into the car, and as the wheels crunched over the gravel and the estate faded behind them, he turned to Parker with a smile. Another case closed. Another footprint vanished in the sands of time. Parker shook his head with a smile. I do wonder, Peter, how you manage to find amusement in the macabre. Wimsey tapped his pipe against his lips thoughtfully. Because, Charles, in the end, the greatest mystery of all is the human heart, its folly, its courage, and its indomitable capacity for both darkness and light. And that, my friend, is a story worth telling. As the car sped away, the rain began to ease, and the first shy rays of sun pierced the cloud cover, casting a tentative glow upon the ancient stones of Clenstone Hall, where the footprints had been left, the secrets unveiled, and the truth, as always, had found its way into the light.